The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, pedestrians weaving through the streets, and snippets of conversation filling the cold winter air. On the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat slouched against the wall of an aging convenience store. His clothes were layered but tattered, barely enough to shield him from the biting wind. Beside him, a cardboard sign read, "Anything helps. God bless." His name was Leonard. At 42, life had dealt him a series of blows that left him homeless for almost a year. Misfortune had stripped him of everything he once held dear. Each day was a gamble. Some kind souls would toss him spare change, but most people passed by quickly, avoiding his gaze. As he adjusted his beanie and rubbed his hands together for warmth, Leonard's eyes scanned the endless parade of shoes walking by. Heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then something caught his attention. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopped just a few feet from him. They weren't just expensive. They were the kind only someone young and privileged would wear. Curiosity piqued, Leonard glanced up. Standing there was a teenager, tall and poised, with his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a sleek jacket. His face seemed familiar, though Leonard couldn't immediately place it. The boy stood waiting at the corner, scrolling through his phone, seemingly unaware of the whispers and discreet photos being snapped by onlookers. Leonard hesitated. He usually didn't approach anyone unless they made eye contact first, but something about the boy's presence felt different. Unhurried, calm, as though he wasn't in sync with the city's relentless pace. Summoning his courage, Leonard called out, his voice dry and raspy from the cold. "Hey, young man, can you spare $1?" The boy froze mid-scroll. Slowly, he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Leonard braced himself for rejection. It wouldn't be the first time. But instead, the boy surprised him. "What do you need it for?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't dismissive or rude, but it carried a certain weight, as if the boy genuinely cared about the answer. Leonard cleared his throat, feeling self-conscious. "A cup of coffee would be nice," he said, managing a small, strained smile. "Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." His voice faltered under the boy's steady gaze, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only curiosity. The boy stepped closer, sliding his phone into his pocket. Leonard could feel the stares of the crowd around them, their silent judgments weighing heavy. He wanted to shrink away, to avoid the attention, but the boy's presence held him there. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he replied, barely above a whisper. The boy nodded, his brow furrowing slightly as though he were piecing together a puzzle. "I'm Barron," he said simply. There was no arrogance in his tone, no sense of superiority, just a surprising sincerity. The city's hum continued, but the moment between them felt charged, as if something far bigger was unfolding. Leonard shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Most people either ignored him or tossed coins without a word. But here was this teenager, not only stopping, but engaging with him as an equal. Then, to Leonard's astonishment, Barron crouched down, meeting him at eye level. The gesture startled Leonard. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his voice calm but direct. Leonard hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his story. People didn't care about the why. But something about Barron's demeanor was disarming. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted. "Lost my job after the plant shut down. Then my health took a turn, and I couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing hard. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his expression focused, not with pity, but with genuine interest. Leonard wasn't used to that. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, people pausing to watch the unusual sight of a young Trump heir crouched beside a homeless man. "What about family?" Barron asked. Leonard's jaw tightened. He shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore. My folks passed years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in ages." He chuckled bitterly, the sound hollow. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all." Barron was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had asked for $1, just one, but Barron's movements suggested something different. When his hand emerged, He wasn't holding a single bill. Instead, he held a crisp $100 note. Leonard's eyes widened, disbelief washing over him. Here, Barron said, extending the bill toward him. This should cover more than coffee. Leonard stared at the money, stunned. His hands trembled as he hesitated to take it. It wasn't just the amount, it was the act itself. Are you serious? Leonard finally managed to say, his voice cracking. The icy wind bit at Leonard's face as he sat hunched against the wall of an old convenience store on the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. His clothes were tattered layers, barely keeping the cold at bay. A crumpled cardboard sign rested against his knees, scrawled with the words, "Anything helps. God bless." At 42, Leonard had been living on the streets for almost a year. Life had unraveled quickly. First, the factory he worked at shut down, then his health failed, and finally, he lost his apartment. Day after day, he gambled for the kindness of strangers, hoping someone might spare him some loose change. More often, though, they hurried past, avoiding his gaze. Leonard adjusted his worn beanie, his hands trembling slightly. Another day, another stream of polished shoes and indifferent faces. Then through the crowd, a pair of spotless white sneakers caught his eye. They stopped a few feet from him. Shoes so pristine, so clearly expensive, they almost gleamed against the grimy pavement. His curiosity piqued, Leonard looked up. Standing there was a teenager, tall, composed, and calm in a way that stood out amidst the chaos of the bustling city. He was scrolling on his phone, his hands tucked into the pockets of a sleek jacket. The kid's face looked familiar, but Leonard couldn't immediately place him. Around them, people began to whisper. A few pulled out their phones to take pictures. Leonard hesitated, unsure if he should say anything, but something about the boy's presence, unhurried and observant, made Leonard take a chance. "Hey, young man," Leonard called, forcing a smile. "Got $1 to spare?" The boy froze, his thumb pausing mid-scroll. Slowly, he lifted his head and turned toward Leonard. His expression was unreadable, and for a moment, Leonard regretted speaking up. He braced for rejection. Instead, the boy's voice cut through the noise of the city. "What do you need it for?" The question wasn't harsh or dismissive, but it carried weight, as though the boy genuinely wanted an answer. Leonard blinked, caught off guard. A coffee would be nice," he stammered. "Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." He rubbed his hands together, feeling suddenly exposed under the teenager's steady gaze. The boy stepped closer, his phone slipping back into his pocket. Around them, the crowd's curiosity grew. Phones hovered in the air, recording. Leonard felt his face heat with embarrassment, but he couldn't look away. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Barron," the boy said simply. There was no arrogance in his tone, just a quiet sincerity. Then, to Leonard's surprise, Barron crouched down, meeting him at eye level. The unexpected gesture startled Leonard. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked. Leonard hesitated. It wasn't often that people asked about his story, and even when they did, he rarely shared it. "Almost a year now," he admitted. "Lost my job when the plant shut down. Then my health got bad. Couldn't keep up with rent." His voice faltered. "It's been hard." Barron listened intently, his brow furrowing slightly. Not in judgment, but in focus, as if every word mattered. Around them, the city hummed with activity, but for Leonard, the world seemed to narrow to just this moment. "What about family?" Barron asked. Leonard shook his head, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. "Not much left. My parents passed years ago. Haven't talked to my brother in too long." Barron was quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket. Leonard's heart raced. He'd only asked for $1, but when Barron's hand emerged, he held a crisp $100 bill. "Here," Barron said, extending the bill. Leonard stared at it, his mind reeling. "Are you serious?" he finally whispered. Barron nodded. "Yeah, but there's a catch." Leonard frowned, gripping the bill tightly. "What's that?" "You've got to promise me something," Barron said. His voice softened, but his gaze stayed steady. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" The words hit Leonard harder than he expected. For the first time in years, someone wasn't just offering him a lifeline, They were challenging him. He nodded, his throat tight. Deal. Barron smiled, stood up, and handed Leonard a slip of paper. Go to this address tomorrow morning. Tell them Barron sent you. They'll help. Leonard unfolded the paper, his hands trembling. It was the address of a local shelter he'd heard of, but never dared to visit. I, I'll go, he said finally. That's all I wanted to hear, Barron said. With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Leonard clutching the bill and the note as if they were his lifelines. And in a way, they were. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the shelter, his nerves tangled with cautious hope. Stepping inside, he was met with warmth, both from the building and the staff. By the end of the day, Leonard had a plan: a bed in the shelter, a doctor's appointment, and a spot in a job training program. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward. Meanwhile, the video of Barron's act of kindness had gone viral, sparking a wave of support for the shelter and inspiring a national movement of generosity. Leonard didn't know about the attention. He was too busy focusing on himself, on honoring the promise he'd made. Weeks later, Leonard reunited with his estranged brother and began rebuilding their bond. Step by step, he pieced his life back together, fueled by the simple, profound kindness of a stranger who had seen him, not just as a man down on his luck, but as someone worth saving.